I'm going to be presenting to you today in English, so I hope that's okay with everyone. But my presentation today is the Crisis of Socialism. And before I talk about socialism, it's important to contrast socialism with entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is the innate quality of human beings to discover and create. Etymologically speaking, the word entrepreneur comes from the discoverer, the seeker. And how I feel about entrepreneurship is like when I wake up in the morning and I get out of bed and I think to myself, what am I going to do today? Well, I have all these different options and all these different ideas. And each idea is something I can act upon. And I think of it like a goal, and the resources around me I utilize to make like a mountain. And I just need to put this piece here, and maybe I can climb up. And I use all my effort to reach my goal. Now that is the creation of information. But there's more to entrepreneurship. The second part is when we have other people in a society like this classroom, everyone is pursuing their own goals. And it is, okay, think of it like this. This is the transportation of information in successive waves. So if you're looking out at a beach, you see the waves coming one after the other. And you see, this spot right here is where the best waves are. And then, historically speaking, you can see all the surfers going to that specific spot to catch those good waves. And as an entrepreneur, you can set up your little beach hut and you can start selling water, sunscreen, swim trunks, towels, everything else a surfer needs. Now, it does one thing. To see a surfer coming and say, you suck at surfing, give up, go home. That's one option. But there is a coordinating process to the market. If I want to sell these items to these potential customers, I don't have to say anything, but I can compliment them. This is, marketing, but it's this coordinating process of information. What do you need? And how can I give it to you? How can I provide it to you? Why don't I set up my beach shop in the middle of the Sahara Desert? Because locationally, that just doesn't make sense. I go to where other people are. And so each person pursuing their own goals has the ability to bring it to a society. And this is the spontaneous order that human nature allows for. And this is how you have societies that are more peaceful and prosperous. I want to tell you a story. Before I came here, I had one of the best jobs in the world. And this job was a delivery driver. But not just any delivery driver. I got to deliver surfboards. And where I worked was in Southern California. So my job literally was to get in a van, get my coffee, maybe some snacks, get my radio, listen to some music, and I would drive in one of the most beautiful states on one of the most beautiful roads, Pacific Coast Highway, all the way from San Diego, Orange County, to Los Angeles, and Malibu. And one of the surf shops I would go to in Malibu was called Zuma J Surf Shop. Now this guy Jay, very interesting guy. I think at one point he was the mayor of Malibu. I heard that his sister was married to Walt Disney. He was also a stunt double for Clint Eastwood. So, very impressive guy, but he would talk to me and he's like, you have my boards? And I'm like, yeah man, got all your boards right here. And he's like, great, you guys made a great product, just keep them coming, and here's the check. And I was that personal carrier of information. I got to take the money back to my business, and they got to provide him with more surfboards and boogie boards, and he's like, I want these professional boards, these 8-footers, some 6-footers, just give it to me. I was like, all right, cool. And the customers would buy these boards and maybe not these boards. And so that's sending information back to him, and sending back to me, and me back to the company I was working for. So it's cool. This is the whole process of entrepreneurship that I got to experience firsthand. But it's time that we talk about socialism. And socialism, historically, was defined as the public control of the means of production. But this, historically, this definition has not sufficed. Why? Because it's not only the first communist society, the Soviet Union, the first Marxist society that was socialist. Actually, not many people know this, it was also Nazi Germany that was socialist, considered the National Socialist Party. And their variety of socialism was fascism, which is not, private in title, in names, but the government was still essentially deciding what to sell, how much to sell, who to sell it to. So fascism is just another variety of socialism. And the contribution of Professor Huerta de Soto was to define socialism as the institutional, methodical aggression against the free exercise of entrepreneurship. What this means is that the state as an institution acts using coercion. Now there's two types of coercion, asystematic and systematic. Asystematic coercion is if I pull out a gun and I say, give me your money. We have market responses to eliminating these types of interactions. Security, video cameras, it's very costly to be this type of asystematic coercive person in a society. But then there's the alternative, systematic coercion. Systematic coercion is an institution that exists perpetuating coercion. This is the institution of the state. If the state says, hey, give me your money, you have no recourse against them. And this is what they then have to justify under the guise of taxation. However, socialism is an intellectual error. And this is the great paradox of socialism, is that the state needs the information which they do not have. So, Mises, Hayek, and other great Austrians have really brought the issues of socialism down to four great arguments. Two of them are static, two of them are dynamic. And the first argument against socialism is the idea of volume. Even if you're the smartest person alive, everyone knows something that you do not know. And even if you are the smartest person in the world, you'll still be ignorant to 99% of the information that exists in the world, because information is held within our minds. It's not something tangible, always. And this goes into the second argument against socialism, which is the idea that it's tacit. It's the know-how rather than the know-that. Information of this nature is subjective. It's like, how do you ride a bicycle? Yes, we can look at formulas, but it goes in hand with the idea that it's dynamic. This issue is, at the moment, responsive to what you do in the environment around you. If the wind is blowing, you have to correct this. And this is only a momentary phenomenon that you have to account for. So this type of information is essentially invisible. You cannot see what there is in the world at all times. The question you have to ask in a socialist society is, how do you paint a great work of art? Well, technically speaking, you throw paint on a board, but that's not how you make a masterpiece. A masterpiece is made by crafting out each detail to its specificity. So, the first argument against socialism, the dynamic one, is that with a centrally planned society, you interrupt the idea for this creation of information. And following this interruption, you literally have the destruction or the blocking of creating this new information. Because, as I said, if you're a person trying to climb your mountain to information, all of a sudden, you have Papa Estado coming in, knocking on the door. It's a nice goal you have here. Be ashamed if someone knocked it over. Not only that, they don't just crush your dreams. They light some dynamite, and they blow it up. And they take everything around, and they say, we're going to make a better society. And they build this ginormous mountain of of all the resources. But this is not what people want. People want to pursue their own ideas and their own goals. And what this creates is a tension in a society. This is the beginnings of the disorder, discoordination of a socialist society. And so when we go down this road into the characteristics of what socialism produces, we begin with the first intervention. You say, okay, you people are now our resources, we're going to tell you what to do. Because it's one will alone that acts. So you go this way, you go this way, you're going this way. And what you have is the first intervention that leads to a distortion in the society. And they look at this distortion and they say, what can we do about this? Well, their only solution is to have another intervention. And each intervention in the society, in the economy, creates more and more distortions. For example, they look at an issue like poverty, and they say it's too costly to live here. Well, maybe we impose a minimum wage, maybe we impose rent control, but the issue that occurs is that these people, then there's a mitigation in the resources available. Socialists don't understand that resources are scarce in society. And as us, as the people who are trying to understand civilization, we have to go back to that first intervention and say that this is the issue. The first intervention. So bureaucracy stacks up, and we have malinvestments. These investments are politicized. They try to favor, become lobbyists, and say, this idea is vital, let's put more resources into these areas. And so you have a corruption. Well, a show of hands. How many of you, the last time you bought heroin or methamphetamine or fentanyl from your drug dealer, were able to get the exact percentages of all the parts that were contained in your drugs? That's right. Because these drugs are on the black market and they're illegal. So you can't see what is contained in the products you're buying. And this is the whole idea of why is there corruption? Well, in the Soviet Union, where you had socialized medicine, and there's a joke in all socialized countries, which is they pretend they're paying us and we pretend they're working for them. But the free market finds its way in the black market or the distorted market. The black market because it's at night. So if you want to receive medical care, you still have to pay. But this is the form of corruption that exists. I had an economist back when I was an undergrad in Los Angeles, my first year, Econ 101, talking about taxation. And I asked him if a little girl selling lemonade should have to pay taxes. He said yes. And I was very disappointed because in practice, what that looks like is not him coming up to the little girl saying, pay me your taxes. It's the police, the arms of the state, saying, you're selling lemonade without permission. You don't have the license to sell. And you haven't even paid the sales tax. This is illegal. Shut it down. You're arrested. To a little girl. So probably in the Soviet Union, you had situations where like little girls on the street like, want to buy some lemonade? But the issue is everything costs more because you have to be more discreet. And this isn't a free market operation. That's why cartels like drug prohibition. The same product that they're selling, they favor it being legal because they can make more money. As well as gasoline in the Soviet Union. People needed gas, but there was none to be found other than in a tunnel, and that's how people were able to drive. You also have prostitution. not just in the form of people trying to sell the only thing that they own, their body, but of law and legislation. And this goes back to the ideas of corruption. There's not even a chance of you having a fair life. This is because socialism is the abolition of private property, not of just your possessions, but of yourself. You're part of this institutional public slavery. And as horrible as a public slavery is, it's much better to be a slave if you have a choice in private slavery, because you are at least possibly an asset. But under public slavery, you're typically regarded as a liability. And then when it gets to the issues of rationing the scarce resources in a society, under socialism, it's impossible to acquire the necessary information that you need. And this results in costs being unknown. That's why there's always a shortage of bicycles and a surplus of skateboards in socialist countries, because these resources are not allocated based on consumer demand. They're allocated based on bureaucracy. But these social consequences are not the only consequences under socialism. More importantly, there is personal consequences, and this is what is considered spiritual distortion. Beginning in a socialist society, it's very important to take over the information. What this looks like is political propaganda and public education, part of public slavery. And when you have political propaganda in the form of a television news network, you're confronting two things. On one hand, you're presented with an issue, COVID, what does Voucher say, Ukraine, Black Lives Matter, whatever it is, something emotional, gets people uncomfortable and looking for something to do. Simultaneously being presented with this issue, you're being told how to interpret it with a solution. So simultaneously, you're both informed and educated. And you feel like a good citizen because you watch the TV. This is homework for adults, essentially, but it's very unhealthy. In the Soviet Union, there was only one opinion, and that was the correct opinion. And that was the opinion Bravado would provide every single morning for all the good Soviets to understand and acquire. And these distortions go into moral behavior. As a society becomes socialized, it becomes politicized. And people become more aggressive because people are not left to do what they truly want. And this is when you have, I'll get to more of this moral behavior, but there's a mimetic influence. People look towards the crowd as what could be right because the masses are pursuing it. And when you don't have a society based on principles and values, then it's very quickly to go from a peaceful society to society that we can observe in the 1930s Germany. And I think the most important characteristic of socialism is this idea of intellectual pride. As Professor Jesús Huerta de Soto has said, life is hard, it's uncertain. We don't know what the future brings. And this uncertainty leaves people uncomfortable. And they would really appreciate if they can be more comfortable, even if it's in an ideological manner. And what they are provided with is the temptation that they can be cared for in the form of the state providing some certainty for the future. But this is the fatal conceit that I mentioned, is that the state is composed of individuals, other people with the same uncertainties for their future. And if you give up your life and liberty to these people, well, then this is when, as John Locke raise the question, who owns you? Do you own yourself, or does the state own you? So these economists, these socialist economists, begin with the assumption that the information is given because they have their mathematical models, their perfect equilibrium, and they think that the issue is a managerial function. But as we've seen, human nature is not just a managerial function. Capitalism and prosperity is an entrepreneurial function. And I don't want to let this opportunity go to waste without mentioning the crisis portion of socialism. Specifically in regards to the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. The crisis was that because we have these resources and we're using them inefficiently, people too are a resource. Above the concentration camps in Auschwitz, it's a pretty famous picture. It says, "Work sets you free." In the Soviet Union, the first communist Marxist society, they had a sign above their work camps that says, "Work is an honor." The socialists have the intellectual pride thinking that they can create a new type of man. And what they didn't realize is that there's a constrained vision to humanity. Human nature is constrained. It's not Plato. It doesn't mold into infinite ways. And when you try to mold humans to this new idea, you have horrible results. And it's never the system, the model that's wrong. It's always the person. So Stalin said, it's very hard to reform people, much easier to make new ones. So when Comrade wrote to Lenin, you didn't tell us, Comrade Lenin, you didn't tell us how to fight religious people. And then Lenin wrote back, Comrade imbecile, murder religious people. That's how you fight them. And murder them in a brutal way that people would be trembling 100 miles around. And as I conclude, I want to close with two short stories. The first story is that one I heard from Michael Malice, which is in the Soviet Union in the 1930s, you had these series of purges. And, you had this situation where a dad would be taken away for whatever dubious reasons. Maybe he was an enemy of the people. The next day, the wife would be arrested because she's married to an enemy of the people. And then the little children go to school, and they're beat up at school because, well, they're the child of the enemy of the people. And then the neighbors can't take the kids in because why are you taking in this enemy of the party? So you had this situation of children in the Soviet Union committing suicide. And the logic was like, what are we going to do with these children committing suicide? The second story I want to mention is one I told to our class in Magnus's class. And this one I heard from Curtis Yarvin. And it's from this writer, Freda Elby, who was writing in the 30s and 40s. She was a devout communist. So devoted she married a man in the cause, and she moved to the Soviet Union. And one day in the 30s, the husband was taken away, and they had a little baby. And Freda Elby returned to the United States, and she was going to her friend. And you have to remember that in the 1930s, everyone who was cool or smart was a communist. She would go to her friends, and she would say, friends, help me. My husband's been taken away. I have this baby. And communism was this very chic movement. It was fashionable. So her friends responded to her, saying, do I know this person? Who are you? And Freda Elby she went to her other friend, Edith Hamilton. And Edith Hamilton said, you know, you really shouldn't expect the material rewards of success to come along with the spiritual rewards of telling the truth. And I think that applies to us in this room studying Austrian economics. Because even if the world gets upside down and moves in directions tending towards more socialist societies, I think it's very important to remember that we're here to tell the truth. And as the motto of Mises, the words of Virgil, tu in cade novis sed contra avientator ito. Do not give in to evil, but deliver evermore boldly against it. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, Matthew, pero ¿usted hacía surf o no? Yo surfer. Ahora me entero yo. Pues a ver si nos mandas alguna película. Este es un movie of you fighting against the waves. ¿Se lo imagina haciendo surf en las playas de California?
I have a example of the Austrian business cycle theory with an example of waves and surfing for another presentation.
Bueno, con esto cerramos. Los alumnos de Euro que se han quedado, les agradezco mucho. Hemos tenido presentaciones a lo largo de todo el curso, pero la última la queríamos darle la oportunidad que Matthew nos la hiciera, y además ha sido un buen ejercicio para nuestro inglés escuchar su agradable acento californiano. Venga, otro aplauso para Matthew. La han llamado a usted en la clase, con lo cual se lo puede mandar a su madre, que estará muy orgullosa. Your mother will be very proud of you. Sí. Bueno, sí, dice que sí. Bueno, muchas gracias, señores. Adelante, como unos leones. Recuerden que estamos aquí para, como ha dicho Matthew, buscar la verdad, the truth. Muchas gracias a todos, hasta el martes de la semana que viene. Aquí está. Vamos a